"This ring is embarrassing. It looks like something from a thrift store," she said, and everything I thought I knew about love shattered in that moment. I'd spent 6 months planning what I believed would be the most meaningful moment of our lives, carefully saving every extra dollar from my work as an electrical systems technician. 3 years with Amber had taught me she valued authenticity over flash, or so I thought. I was 28, stable, the kind of guy who showed up when he said he would and believed that consistency and genuine care mattered more than grand gestures or expensive displays. I met Amber at a community festival in Richmond where she was managing the food vendor coordination for her restaurant. I was immediately drawn to her laugh and the way she handled the chaos with genuine warmth rather than stress. She was 26, ambitious, and had this way of making even ordinary conversations feel important. Those first months felt like discovering someone who shared my appreciation for real things over trendy nonsense. She talked about wanting to open her own place someday, not some flashy downtown spot, but a neighborhood restaurant where people would come for comfort food and honest conversation. I respected her work ethic and the way she cared about her staff, often staying late to help servers who were struggling or covering shifts when someone had family emergencies. When her family went through a financial crisis during her second year of culinary school, I didn't hesitate to pick up extra freelance electrical work to help her finish her certification program. I spent weekends rewiring old houses and installing ceiling fans in apartment complexes, work that left my hands raw but my heart full because I was contributing to her dreams. When her student loans from a failed business degree started overwhelming her, I quietly took on even more weekend projects for 6 months to help her get ahead of the payments. I never made her feel guilty about it or kept a running tally of what I'd contributed. She never asked me to do these things, but I wanted to because that's what you do for someone you love. I believed we were building something solid together, something that would last because it was based on genuine care rather than superficial attractions. Looking back, I realize I was so focused on supporting her goals that I never stopped to examine whether she truly valued the foundation we were creating together. Finding the engagement ring felt like destiny when I discovered it at an estate sale in February. It was a 1920s Art Deco piece with intricate platinum filigree work surrounding a modest but brilliant center stone. The moment I saw it, I thought of the stories Amber had shared about her grandmother's jewelry collection, pieces her family had lost during hard times but that she still described with reverence. This ring had that same authentic character, the kind of craftsmanship that told a story rather than just displaying wealth. The elderly woman selling it told me it had belonged to her aunt, who had worn it through 47 years of marriage, and something about that history felt significant. I spent weeks researching its history and having it professionally restored by a jeweler who specialized in vintage pieces, convinced I'd found something that perfectly represented our relationship, valuable because of its meaning rather than its price tag. The vintage piece cost me $800, money I'd saved by bringing lunch to work every day and skipping the expensive coffee shop Amber loved. I planned to propose at the Botanical Gardens where we'd had our first official date, surrounded by the same flowering trees that had provided the backdrop for the moment I knew I wanted to spend my life with her. I had reservations at the small Italian restaurant where she'd told me she loved me, imagining how we'd celebrate afterward over her favorite tiramisu while planning our future together. I even bought a bottle of champagne that I'd hidden in my truck, ready to toast the beginning of forever. I had practiced what I would say, how I would get down on one knee by the same bench where we'd shared our first kiss 3 years earlier. I imagined her tears of joy when she saw how much thought I'd put into finding something that honored both her personal history and our shared future. Everything felt perfect because I thought I understood what mattered to her, believed I knew the woman I'd spent 3 years loving and supporting through every challenge life had thrown her way. I was completely unprepared for the possibility that the woman I'd fallen in love with had been replaced by someone who measured affection by dollar signs rather than genuine thought and care. The Botanical Gardens were perfect that Saturday afternoon, with the cherry blossoms in full bloom and couples scattered throughout the pathways enjoying the spring weather. I led Amber to our special bench, the one tucked beside the rose garden where we'd sat for hours during our first official date, talking about our dreams and discovering how much we had in common. My heart was pounding with nervous excitement as I pulled out the carefully wrapped ring box, thinking about how this spot would forever be marked as the place where our forever began. I had rehearsed this moment for weeks, imagining her surprise and joy when she realized how much thought I'd put into finding something that honored her grandmother's memory and represented our shared appreciation for authentic craftsmanship over flashy displays. When I dropped to one knee and opened the box, revealing the restored vintage piece with its delicate platinum filigree catching the sunlight just perfectly, I expected to see wonder in her eyes, maybe even tears of happiness. Instead, I watched her face transform from confusion to something that looked like genuine disgust, as if I'd just presented her with a piece of garbage instead of a ring I'd spent months researching and carefully restoring. The laughter that burst from her lips wasn't the nervous giggle of someone overwhelmed with emotion. It was harsh, mocking, loud enough that the elderly couple feeding ducks nearby turned to stare at us with obvious concern. She actually pointed at the ring while declaring that it looked like something from a thrift store, her voice carrying across the quiet garden space in a way that made me want to disappear into the ground beneath me. I knelt there frozen, still holding the box, as she continued her tirade about how embarrassing this was, explaining how all her friends had received proper modern solitaire diamonds from Tiffany or Kay Jewelers, rings that actually looked like engagement rings instead of old lady jewelry that would make her look poor and unfashionable in photos. The humiliation was overwhelming as other couples throughout the gardens stopped their conversations to watch this woman loudly rejecting what I had thought was a beautiful, meaningful gesture of love and commitment. I could feel their eyes on us, some looking sympathetic, others appearing uncomfortable with the scene unfolding in what should have been a peaceful, romantic setting. I quietly closed the ring box and stood up, my legs unsteady, unable to find words for what I was experiencing, and simply started walking toward the parking lot while she followed behind me, still talking, still explaining all the ways I had failed to meet her expectations. The lecture continued in the parking lot where Amber informed me that I should have consulted her best friend Riley about her taste preferences before making such an important purchase decision. She explained how I clearly didn't understand modern engagement ring standards and that any decent proposal required spending at least 3 months of salary on a proper setting from a recognizable jewelry brand that her friends would respect and admire. I stood by my truck listening to her detail exactly how I had failed as a boyfriend and future husband, how she had been looking forward to showing off her engagement ring to her coworkers and friends at the restaurant but couldn't possibly wear something that looked like it came from an estate sale or antique shop. The woman I thought I knew, the one who had claimed to value substance over superficiality, disappeared completely as she suggested I return the ring and try again when I could afford something she wouldn't be ashamed to show off to people whose opinions apparently mattered more than the thought behind the gesture. Her voice took on this condescending tone like she was explaining basic social expectations to someone who had grown up under a rock, making me feel foolish for thinking that history and craftsmanship could compete with brand names and price tags. I realized in that moment that she had never seen me as a partner building something meaningful together, but as a provider who was supposed to deliver specific material proof of his worth and social status. When she finally finished her comprehensive critique of my proposal, my financial planning, and my general understanding of what women expect from their men, I looked at her standing there with her arms crossed and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. I told her I understood exactly what she was saying, got in my truck, and drove away while she stood there looking genuinely confused that I wasn't immediately agreeing to her demands for a do-over with a more expensive, socially acceptable ring that would make her friends jealous rather than embarrassed. That evening, while Amber went out with her friends apparently celebrating her escape from what she was calling an embarrassing engagement attempt, I sat alone in my apartment processing what had just happened and trying to understand how I could have been so completely wrong about someone I thought I knew. The ring box sat on my kitchen table, and every time I looked at it, I felt a mixture of humiliation and something that was starting to feel like relief. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, not just her cruel laughter but the way she had talked about her friends' rings, the casual mention of consulting Riley about taste preferences, and the assumption that I would simply return this meaningful piece and start over with something more expensive and socially acceptable. As the hours passed and she didn't come home or even text to apologize or check on me, I began to realize that this rejection had revealed something fundamental about Amber's character that I had somehow missed during 3 years of supporting her dreams and building what I thought was a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine care. Riley Martinez had been Amber's best friend since college, But over the past year, I had started to see her as a real person rather than just an extension of Amber's social circle. She was 31, a freelance jewelry designer who created custom pieces for local boutiques and had recently gone through a difficult divorce from her controlling husband who had tried to sabotage her business out of jealousy and spite. Riley had this quiet confidence and genuine appreciation for craftsmanship that made our conversations feel substantive rather than superficial. When Amber would criticize my practical nature or make jokes about my preference for quiet evenings over expensive nights out, Riley often defended me, pointing out that consistency and reliability were valuable qualities that many women would appreciate. She had started her own jewelry business after her divorce, working with vintage pieces and creating custom designs that honored both history and personal meaning rather than following trendy social media aesthetics. I had always respected her work ethic and the way she had rebuilt her life after a marriage that had left her financially and emotionally drained, but I was beginning to realize that I also genuinely enjoyed her company in a way that felt different from my relationship with Amber. Sitting there with that rejected ring, I found myself thinking about Riley's reaction when I had mentioned finding it at the estate's sale months ago. She had asked thoughtful questions about its history and craftsmanship, commenting on how rare it was to find authentic Art Deco pieces in such good condition and how meaningful it must be to wear something with such a romantic story behind it. Her eyes had lit up when I described the restoration process, and she had mentioned that vintage engagement rings were becoming popular again among women who valued uniqueness and history over generic mall jewelry that everyone else was wearing. The contrast between her genuine interest in the ring's story and Amber's horrified rejection of its thrift store appearance was becoming impossible to ignore. I realized that Riley would understand why I had chosen this particular piece, would appreciate the thought and research that had gone into finding something meaningful rather than expensive, and would probably be fascinated by the craftsmanship details that had made Amber laugh with embarrassment. Instead of returning the ring to get my money back or trying to exchange it for something that would meet Amber's social expectations, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would offer it to Riley, not as a romantic gesture since she was my girlfriend's best friend and I was presumably still in a relationship, but as recognition of someone who would truly appreciate its artistry and historical significance. She could keep it as a gift, redesign it into something for her own collection, or use it as inspiration for her custom work. Whatever felt right to someone who actually understood that value came from meaning and craftsmanship rather than price tags and brand recognition. The next morning, after a sleepless night during which Amber still hadn't come home or bothered to contact me, I texted Riley asking if she wanted to meet for coffee, claiming I had something that might interest her professionally and personally. I told myself I was just making sure the ring went to someone who would value it properly, but deep down I knew I was also curious about spending time with someone who saw beauty and meaning in the same things I did, someone whose priorities seemed to align with mine in ways that my relationship with Amber apparently never had. Riley agreed to meet me at the small coffee shop downtown where she often worked on her design sketches, and when I walked in that Tuesday morning, I found her sitting at a corner table with her laptop open and jewelry catalogs spread around her workspace. She looked up when I approached, and I was struck by how different she seemed from Amber. There was something calm and genuine about her presence that made me feel immediately at ease despite the awkwardness of the situation. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, no makeup, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, and somehow she looked more beautiful than Amber ever had in all her carefully planned outfits and Instagram-ready appearances. I sat down across from her, ordered coffee, and tried to figure out how to explain what I was about to do without making it sound like I was having some kind of emotional breakdown. I started by telling her about the proposal, about Amber's reaction, about how her rejection had made me realize that we valued completely different things in life and relationships. Riley listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned and sympathetic as I described the scene at the Botanical Gardens and Amber's lecture about proper engagement ring standards. When I finished explaining what had happened, she shook her head with genuine sadness and told me she was sorry that someone she cared about had treated me so cruelly, especially when it was obvious how much thought and love I had put into the gesture. She mentioned that she had always thought I was too good for Amber, that she had watched me support her friend through every challenge while getting very little appreciation in return, and that she had often wondered why I stayed in a relationship where my kindness was taken for granted. Then I pulled out the ring box and set it on the table between us, explaining that I wanted to give it to someone who would actually appreciate its history and craftsmanship rather than returning it to some jewelry store where it would sit unappreciated. I told her she could keep it, redesign it, use it in her work, or do whatever felt right. I just wanted it to go to someone who understood that its value came from its story and artistry rather than its price tag. Riley stared at the box for a long moment before carefully opening it, and when she saw the ring, her entire face changed in a way that took my breath away. Her eyes filled with tears as she gently lifted it from the box, turning it in the light to examine the intricate platinum filigree work and the way the center stone caught the morning sun streaming through the coffee shop windows. She told me it was one of the most beautiful pieces she had ever seen, explaining that it was actually a rare 1920s design worth significantly more than I had paid, but more importantly, it was exactly the style she had always dreamed of owning. She described how authentic Art Deco engagement rings were incredibly sought after by women who appreciated vintage craftsmanship, and how the restoration work I had commissioned was absolutely perfect. As she held the ring and talked about its history, I realized I was seeing someone truly appreciate a gesture that had been meant with love and care, someone who understood that the thought behind a gift mattered infinitely more than its market value. Our conversation stretched to 3 hours as we talked about everything from jewelry design to life goals to what we both wanted from relationships, and I discovered that Riley and I had more in common than Amber and I ever had. When I finally asked her to keep the ring, not just as a professional courtesy but because I genuinely wanted her to have something beautiful that she would treasure, she looked at me with such gratitude and warmth that I felt something shift between us. She told me she would be honored to wear it, that it was the most thoughtful gift anyone had ever given her, and that she would think of this conversation every time she looked at it. As we prepared to leave, she admitted that she had developed feelings for me over the past year but had never acted on them because she respected my relationship. By the time we said goodbye in the parking lot, we both understood that something significant had happened between us, something that felt like the beginning of a real connection based on shared values and genuine appreciation rather than convenience or social expectations. The weeks that followed felt like discovering what a healthy relationship actually looked like after years of walking on eggshells and trying to prove my worth through financial support and grand gestures. Riley and I started slowly, meeting for coffee dates that turned into long walks through the historic district where we'd discuss her jewelry projects and my electrical work with equal enthusiasm. She had this way of asking thoughtful questions about my job that made me realize how long it had been since someone had shown real curiosity about my daily life. Our conversations flowed naturally from work to books to dreams for the future, and I kept being surprised by how much we had in common and how easy it was to talk to someone who actually listened. Instead of expensive restaurants and social media-worthy activities, we found ourselves gravitating toward quiet coffee shops, used bookstores, and weekend farmers markets where Riley would hunt for vintage pieces, and I discovered I actually enjoyed browsing handmade crafts and talking to local artisans. Meanwhile, Amber had apparently decided that my walking away from her proposal critique was just a temporary reaction that would pass once I came to my senses. According to mutual friends, she had spent the weeks telling everyone that I was being dramatic and stubborn, that she had only been trying to help me understand social expectations around engagement rings, and that she was confident I would eventually return with a proper apology and more appropriate jewelry. She had even started dropping hints about specific rings she'd seen at Tiffany, apparently assuming I was using this time to save up for something that would meet her standards. She seemed genuinely convinced that our 3-year relationship and my obvious devotion meant I would eventually cave to her demands rather than lose her permanently. 3 weeks after that first coffee date with Riley, something had shifted between us from friendship into something deeper and more meaningful than anything I had ever experienced. Riley wore the vintage ring on her right hand, explaining to people that it was a gift from a friend who appreciated her work, and I found myself looking forward to seeing it catch the light during our conversations. We had started spending most evenings together, sometimes at her studio where she would work on custom pieces while I read, other times at my apartment where we would cook dinner and talk about our days with the kind of comfortable intimacy that had been missing from my relationship with Amber. When Riley posted a photo of her hand wearing the Art Deco ring with my arm visible in the background, captioned about finding unexpected beauty and love in authentic places, I knew she was ready to let people know something special was developing between us. Amber saw the post within hours, and apparently the combination of recognizing both the ring she had rejected and my distinctive vintage watch in the background hit her like a physical blow. According to Riley, who called me immediately after Amber's furious phone call, Amber had started screaming about betrayal and manipulation before Riley could even explain what had happened. Amber demanded to know how long Riley had been plotting to steal her boyfriend, accused her of manipulating the situation to get the ring she had always coveted, and refused to listen when Riley tried to explain that our connection had developed naturally after I offered her the ring because she would appreciate its true value. Riley handled the confrontation with remarkable grace, calmly explaining that she had never pursued me while I was in a relationship, that I had offered her the ring as a gesture of friendship, and that our romantic feelings had emerged organically as we discovered how much we had in common. The revelation that I had not only moved on but had found someone who treasured the very ring she had rejected with such public humiliation seemed to shatter Amber's confidence in ways my quiet departure from the botanical gardens never could have. Riley described how Amber's anger quickly shifted to desperate bargaining, with her suddenly claiming that she had been testing me to see if I would fight for our relationship, that she had always loved the vintage ring but had been scared of commitment, and that she was ready to appreciate my thoughtful gesture if I would just give her another chance. When Riley explained that I was genuinely happy and their relationship was over, Amber's desperation became frightening as she started making threats about ruining Riley's business and claiming I was just a rebound. By the time Riley hung up, Amber was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what she had lost when she chose social expectations over genuine love. What followed over the next few months was a complete unraveling of Amber's carefully constructed world as she realized that rejecting my proposal hadn't just cost her a ring, it had cost her the devoted partner who had been quietly supporting her dreams while she took his loyalty for granted. The woman who had confidently expected me to return with a more expensive ring and proper apology was now facing the reality that I was genuinely happy with someone who appreciated the very qualities she had dismissed as inadequate. Amber's initial rage at Riley quickly expanded into a desperate campaign to win me back, alternating between furious accusations and pathetic apologies that revealed just how little she had understood about what she was losing. She started showing up at my workplace during lunch breaks, parking across from the electrical supply company where I picked up materials, trying to catch me alone so she could explain how she had made a terrible mistake and was ready to love any ring I chose. Her behavior became increasingly erratic as she launched a social media campaign that backfired spectacularly, posting passive-aggressive content about fake friends and stolen relationships that only made her look desperate and vindictive to our mutual acquaintances. She tried to convince our friend group that Riley had been plotting to steal me for months, that she had manipulated the entire situation to get her hands on the vintage ring she had always coveted, and that I was just a rebound relationship that would never last once the novelty wore off. The problem with her narrative was that everyone who knew us had witnessed 3 years of me supporting Amber through every challenge while getting very little appreciation in return, and they could see the obvious difference in how happy and relaxed I seemed with Riley. When her attempts to turn our friends against my new relationship failed, Amber escalated to contacting my family directly, calling my mother and sister to explain how heartbroken she was and how much she regretted not appreciating my thoughtful proposal properly. She told them she was ready to accept any ring and build the life we had planned together, apparently believing that family pressure might convince me to reconsider. Unfortunately for Amber, my family had never been particularly impressed with her entitled attitude and obvious expectation that I should fund her lifestyle, and they were genuinely happy to hear that I had found someone who valued my steady, caring nature. My mother actually thanked Amber for calling because it gave her a chance to tell her exactly how much happier I seemed with Riley. The final blow came when Amber made the mistake of confronting Riley at her jewelry studio during business hours, creating a scene in front of potential customers that revealed the depth of her desperation. According to Riley, Amber had demanded that she return the ring and step away from our relationship, claiming that I was still in love with her and was just using Riley to make her jealous. When Riley calmly explained that she had no intention of giving up either the ring or our relationship, Amber lost complete control and started screaming about how Riley had ruined her life by stealing her boyfriend. The other customers witnessed this outburst, and word quickly spread through the local arts community about Amber's unstable behavior, damaging her reputation far more than any response from us ever could have. Meanwhile, Amber's professional life began suffering as her obsession with monitoring my social media and planning increasingly desperate strategies started affecting her performance at the restaurant. Her manager received multiple customer complaints about her distracted service, and several coworkers mentioned that she had been using breaks to call me repeatedly and drive by places where she thought I might be with Riley. The woman who had once prided herself on her professional competence was now struggling to maintain basic job responsibilities because she couldn't accept that her rejection of my proposal had been the final straw in a relationship where she had consistently prioritized her own needs over building something meaningful together. By the end of those turbulent months, it was clear that Amber's desperate attempts to reclaim what she had lost were only highlighting how much she had taken for granted and how completely she had misunderstood both my character and what makes a relationship work. 6 months later, Riley and I attended our mutual friend Sarah's wedding at a beautiful vineyard outside Richmond, and for the first time since the Botanical Garden disaster, I felt genuinely excited about celebrating love and commitment with someone who understood what those concepts actually meant. Riley looked stunning in a simple navy dress that complemented the vintage Art Deco ring she now wore proudly on her left hand, not as an engagement ring but as a symbol of our authentic connection and shared appreciation for meaningful gestures over expensive displays. We had grown closer through the months of Amber's desperate campaign, and watching how Riley handled that pressure with grace had only reinforced my belief that I had found someone truly special, someone who brought out the best in my character rather than making me feel inadequate. The wedding reception was in full swing when I spotted Amber across the crowded tent, standing alone by the bar with that familiar look of someone checking her phone constantly, hoping for rescue from social isolation. She had clearly struggled since our breakup, looking thinner and more fragile than I remembered, wearing a dress that seemed too formal for the casual vineyard setting and makeup that couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. When she noticed Riley and me together, laughing with other guests and clearly comfortable in each other's company, her expression shifted through several emotions before settling on determined desperation, and I knew we were about to face one final confrontation. Amber approached us during dinner, walking up to our table with forced confidence that barely masked her underlying panic. She looked directly at me as she announced that she had been thinking about us lately, about what we had shared and what she now realized she had thrown away in a moment of vanity and social pressure. She told me she was ready to accept any ring I chose, that she understood now how thoughtful my original proposal had been, and that our 3 years of real history meant more than my rebound relationship with someone who had simply been in the right place at the right time. Her voice carried across nearby tables, and I could feel other guests turning to watch this unexpected drama unfold. I looked at Amber making her final desperate plea, and instead of anger or satisfaction, I felt genuine sadness for someone who had learned all the wrong lessons from our breakup. I told her calmly that her rejection of the ring hadn't just been about jewelry preferences, it had revealed her true priorities and shown me that we wanted fundamentally different things from relationships. I explained that I was grateful for her rejection because it had led me to someone who valued sincerity over status, someone who appreciated thoughtful gestures rather than demanding expensive displays of devotion. Riley sat beside me with graceful confidence, not threatened by Amber's presence but clearly ready to defend our relationship if necessary. When Amber continued protesting, insisting that she had learned from her mistakes and was ready to build the life we had originally planned, Riley finally spoke up with quiet authority. She pointed out that real love wasn't about settling for someone after better options failed, that authentic relationships were built on recognizing and appreciating value when you first encountered it, not after losing it taught you what you should have treasured. She told Amber that while she was sorry their friendship had ended badly, she couldn't feel guilty about finding happiness with someone who valued the same authentic qualities she did, someone who had proven his character through years of steady support rather than grand gestures designed to impress others. As we walked away from that final confrontation, leaving Amber standing alone with tears in her eyes and the full weight of her choices finally settling on her shoulders, I realized this moment represented more than just the end of my relationship with someone who had never truly appreciated what I offered. It was the beginning of understanding what I deserved from love and partnership, what it meant to be with someone who saw my thoughtful nature as a gift rather than an obligation. The right person will always treasure what the wrong person rejects, And sometimes the most painful rejections lead to the most beautiful discoveries about what you're truly capable of building with someone who sees your worth.